All right, on page 357, I want to talk about different types of leases. There are many, many different types of leases that we're going to be talking about. The first one I want to talk about is called a gross lease. A gross lease is where the tenant pays the landlord money, and then the landlord goes out and pays all the expenses, like the real estate taxes, the homeowners associations, any of the small maintenance. This is your typical residential lease that you see. Oh, I'm renting a house. We pay $800 to the landlord. The landlord then goes out and pays the real estate taxes and all of that, okay? So that's a typical residential lease. The landlord is getting gross amount of money. That's where the term comes from. From that, he pays his bills off, okay? The second type of lease is called a net lease. This is where the tenant pays the landlord rent, and then the tenant pays the landlord's expenses, like maintenance, taxes, insurance. So the landlord is receiving a net amount of money. This is the typical commercial lease. The golden goose of this lease is what they call the triple net lease. Sometimes you'll hear them call it net, 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 because the landlord is collecting only rent and pays no expenses out of it. The tenant pays maintenance, taxes, insurance. Net, net, net. Triple net lease. These are your big, big, publicly traded commercial companies like Marsh, which is not here anymore. And the reason I say that is because the example I'm going to give you here, I brokered a deal for Marsh. I'll give you the example. There are some other charges they may charge. Have you ever heard of the term CAM? Common Area Maintenance. This building is a great example. I rent this property, but there is some common area that all of us use. The walkway and the hallway, the atrium, the elevator. Somebody has to clean that, and we have to pay for it. So I pay a portion of the expenses to clean that common area maintenance. Or, for instance, pushing the snow on the parking lot. It's another good example. When it snows, the landlord hires a blade and he pushes it. There's a fee for that. I have to pay a percentage of that. In this particular situation, it's 1/12 because there are 12 units. All right? There is a thing called a percentage lease. A percentage lease is where the landlord gets a percentage of the income generated by the tenant. The landlord participates in the tenant's business. Typically, it's a percentage of the gross income as well.
A flea market would be something probably in that because they charge booth fees, right?
I don't know. If they only charge a booth fee, then they're not participating in the business.
There's places out there that charge an additional 7% right now.
Then that would be a percentage lease. Like you know what a barbershop is.
Oh, that's
Booyah! From downtown.
I'll take my kids there.
That was mean. I'm sorry. I apologize. Like what? Booth rental could be, I mean, if a barber pays a percentage of his income as rent for that seat, then yes, that would be a percentage lease. That's a percentage lease. It's based on the income generated by the tenant. The landlord participates in the business. All right? You guys know where Palomino is? Downtown? When that opened originally, David Simon struck a deal with them for some large amount of money per square foot, and they said, we can't do that, it's too much. He said, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do a percentage of your income. He actually made more money because the Palomino did a really killer business their first couple of years, and they're still really good. So he was smart enough to say, okay, I'll take the risk and let you work, and I'll get a percentage of your lease or a percentage of your income. All right? So it's a percentage lease. Now, in some cases, yes, Jess?
They don't have any say in like how to run a business, correct?
No, they do not have a say on how I run the business, theoretically. All right? You get into the big boys, yes, they do. Simon, for example. You guys know why Chick-fil-A's not in the mall anymore? Because they're not open on Sundays, and that's Simon's requirement. Got to be open 7 days a week because we want the maximum draw to all the people. So yeah, Simon actually gets into the business sometimes. I'm actually going to take that back just now that I said it, because I actually do know some other big companies where they require the tenant, even as not part of the lease, they require the tenant to submit their monthly income to them because there are standards. Let me give you an example. I know one right out here, Ohio Properties. Nick Kirkendall, all right? In their company, they have a guy whose sole business is to look at all of their tenants to make sure their tenants' income is in line with the national average of like a pizza place. So if they've got a pizza place in one of their spots, makes $8 a square foot, let's say. When this guy reports to Ohio Properties and says, well, I'm having a bad month, I'm only making $5, ding, 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 that's a potential clue in that that tenant's got problems and may end up going dark. So there are a lot of malls that require their people to submit their income so that they know if they're going to be in trouble or potential troublemakers or how to help them get more business. I don't know if they really dictate, can't sell that, can't sell this, and can't sell that, but yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you another one, and I hate to tell you this because I've already been chastised once about this. I owned a pool hall up in the back corner of the mall. This is just all of my vast experience that I want to share with you. Up in the back corner of the Greenwood Park Mall, did you guys ever hear of Billiards Cafe? I owned that. I was a professional pool player. I still am. I still am. I also teach pool at IU. It's a, what's that, hyper class where you can go and take, I teach billiards, it's called billiards at IU, which pisses me off that I'm a Purdue grad and I get a check from IU. Yeah.
It's money.
Yeah. Oh, well, they pay me. But anyway, so in the big heyday, you guys remember the lingerie lunches? We had a lingerie lunch at the pool hall at the bar one day. It wasn't 24 hours later, I got a call from Simon's attorney that said, you can't do that. That's too close to adult entertainment. That's not our style that we want of a family mall. You are on our property, even though it's owned by a separate person and you have a lease with that we have a master agreement with all the people that own buildings from us. One of them says you cannot do that. Sure it was. It was my peach of an idea. Worked out really good that day. We made a lot of money. But I mean, literally, it was like Monday afternoon. Tuesday evening, I had a phone call from Simon's attorney. Can't do that. Sorry. My bad. Yeah. Easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. So on a percentage lease, though, however, one of you guys haven't come up with the one problem with a percentage lease. Think about the barber chair. Once the business goes, doesn't do business. So a lot of times percentage leases have what they call a base plus a percentage.
So would that be like insurance agencies?
I don't know.
I'm asking.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just saying, however, if the example of a barber chair is actually really good now that he's brought it up. What happens if you charge a barber 10% of everything he makes, but he goes on vacation for a month? There's no income generated. What's 10% of zero? Still zero. That's not fair to the owner, and now my business is hurting because that guy went on vacation. So what they will do is say, I'll tell you what it is. It's $400 plus 5% of whatever you do. That way, if you go on vacation and do absolutely zero, I can still count on my 5% or my $500. All right? So a lot of them have a base plus a percentage. There's also another trick on the exam, hint, hint, hint. You could have a base or a percentage, whichever's greater. That way you might say, look, you're going to pay $1,000 or 4% of your income. Whatever you do, I get the bigger of the two. So the better they do, the more rent they pay. So on the test example and questions, please watch out for the words base plus a percentage or base or a percentage. Whichever is greater, typically. I go back to my favorite statement. I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. You guys know what groceries are? You think you do? Because it took Marsh 9 pages to define groceries. I brokered the deal down here on South 135 in 2002 between the owner and the new owner, and Marsh was their tenant. This was an example of they sold the building to an investor, leased it back, so they were the tenant, and they paid $11,833 a month plus 4% of anything over $1 million in groceries. 4% of anything over $1 million in groceries. There's a lot in that lease. There's a base, $11,833. There's an overage, 4%, but there's also this thing they call the floor. It's $1 million. That's what triggers the percentage. All right? So, for example, if they did $900,000 in grocery sales, how much overage would they pay? Zero, because they didn't meet the minimum. If they do 1.4 million, they only pay on the overage. So you would subtract the floor of $1 million, and they would pay that 4% of $400,000. But it was of groceries. So things like alcohol didn't count. Prescriptions, tobacco, lottery, floral, deli. If you walked into their Marsh and you bought bologna and cheese and bread and walked out in the parking lot and put your sandwich together and ate it, that was groceries. But if you walked to the deli and bought the same bologna sandwich already pre-made, that's not groceries. No, it was bologna. That's deli. The floor triggers the percentage. That floor could be any number you guys are granting. Could be zero. You could pay on all your sales. Your floor could be a zero. Your floor, in this particular case, they had $1 million floor. So that's an example of a base plus a percentage. All right? So that's a percentage lease. There's a variable lease over on the next page. Variable is when it changes, and it's the change is defined in it. A lot of times variable leases are used for small companies that are just starting out. I started on a variable lease here in 2003. I said, how much is the rent? He said, it's this amount. I said, dude, I'm just starting out. I'm having a little trouble. Can I get a break? He's like, I'll tell you what I'll do. The first 5 months, I'll charge you this. And then on the 6 months, it jumps up to the right price. That's a variable lease. We knew going in. He had a reason to help me out because he wanted his space rented. You know, he didn't want to collect 2 months of full price and I go under because I didn't have enough students. He'd rather let me start out and work my way up. And then eventually he knows that I've been here now almost 14 years. Right? So that's a variable lease. Ground lease. A ground lease is where the landlord will lease the ground to somebody and the tenant may buy the airspace. Remember I told you the Simon building's a great example. It's the Simon building sitting in Simon's airspace on the city's ground that we leased to them. Okay? You guys know where the Greenwood Park Mall is. All that property around the outside of the mall that's got the movie theater and Chili's and Jared's and all of that, that's still all Simon's land. He is leasing it to those people. Why? There's a couple reasons. The most obvious is, one, it's very valuable. Simon doesn't want to give it up. But because it is very valuable, Jared's, let's go with Chili's. What business is Chili's in? Selling food. Can they afford a $2 or $3 million piece of land? No. What else can you not do on your taxes with land? Exactly. You cannot depreciate land. Remember on the cost approach, we pulled land out, figured the depreciation on the building, then put the land back in, because you can't depreciate taxes on land. So if I bought a $2 million piece of land, I'm out $2 million bucks, and I can't write it off on my taxes. But wait, what if I leased that land? That's now rent. That's deductible on my taxes. So while Simon doesn't want to sell that land because it's very valuable, Chili's doesn't want to buy it anyway. Well, it's worth more because they can pay rent on it and then deduct that rent off their taxes. And they're not out $2 million bucks. They're only out $10,000 a month, which they'll make every month by selling hamburgers and chili, which is ironic that Chili's doesn't sell chili. Maybe it's just me. I think it's funny, shipment by ship. Okay, maybe not. Why are they called apartments when they're so damn close? And drive on a parkway. This is George Carlin. Those are old George Carlin stuff. All right, so ground lease is where you just lease the ground to the tenant. You still own the ground. Here's the cool thing. After that ground lease is over, the owner of that building, like Chili's, they have depreciated that building all the way out and they're done, and they move off to another site. That building becomes the landlord's building. You guys know where Jared's is? What was there before Jared's? Ground Round. That became Ground Round's, Simon's building. He just tore it down, built a new one for Jared. Yes?
Is this for only buildings, or is it like farm ground?
You could lease farm ground to another farmer. And there's actually two ways to do that. One's called sharecropping and the other's called cash rents. Yeah, so if I don't want to farm my 40 acres, but your husband does, I can lease it, that ground to him for, you know, whatever the cost of the taxes are. You do all the work. Yeah. And you could, the other one's called sharecropping, where I own the land, you do the work, whatever we make, we split in some fashion. So one's a cash rent where you just pay me a flat fee, and the other is where we split the portion of the share. All right, let's stop for a second.